Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Arlene Diamco, the MultiDimensional MD, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Dr. Jim Gaydos. And as always, I love to bring the intuitive aspects of health back to medicine in practical and tangible ways. And we're going to do that again for you today. So I thought, as to help us prepare for this course that we're going to be teaching this weekend for osteopathic physicians to help sense and release emotional shock, I thought that we would talk about olfaction and how that relates to emotions, stuck subconscious trauma patterns, and even intuition. So, my friend here, Dr. Jim Gaydos, is he is, I mean, I don't know, I like to say that you love to talk about smell because he loves the intuition of it and the anatomy of it and the embryology of it. But we're going to talk about it in more practical terms for you today. And first of all, we just wanted to talk about how smell is a primal sense. So when the fetus is developing, smell starts to develop around 8 weeks, and that little fetus is already smelling inside the mom's womb by 24 weeks. So anything that the mom eats or drinks, that little fetus is smelling it and tasting it because smell and taste are so related. And I know, Jim, you have so much to say about smell and like the pathways of it and everything.
Well, just a little bit that I know about it. I mean, in the natural world, say canine pups who are deprived of smell won't survive uh, their birth because they need to be able to nurse, and they won't be able to find the teat and to nurse. And then you let them get older, and more mature canines can't, which have 40 times the surface area that we have for smell, um, can't survive in the wilderness if they can't find their prey. So it is, even going back to the ancient plants, they produced odorants so that insects and later on mammals could help them propagate. So it is a very ancient mechanism to use smell so that we can get by in the world.
And I feel like a lot of people don't really think about their sense of smell much until it's lost. And we saw that with COVID-19 and all the anosmia. And we're actually going to be helping teach physicians this weekend too how to address that as well. But it's so interesting because then we go into olfaction and taste and emotions, and the thing is with smell, what makes it one of your primal senses is that it goes directly to your cerebral cortex. So you smell the whatever is triggering your sense of smell, and those messages, they don't go through the thalamus, which is your relay station that all the other senses go through and then send it out to other places in the brain. This goes directly to your cerebral cortex. It goes directly to your amygdala, which is a very important part of your limbic system and emotions, which means that smell can trigger memories and emotions. And that's whether or not you're conscious of it. So if you walk into a room and you smell something, then you might think of, like, a restaurant, you might think of like something that reminds you of childhood or smells really good. But on the other hand, even if it's not conscious, that smell can trigger subconscious stress or trauma patterns. So you could walk into a situation and not know why you're triggered, but suddenly you feel stressed or anxious. And it's not that it's your only sense that might trigger that, but it's one of them that I wanted to highlight this time so that maybe you'll be aware of it. And sometimes you might not even be aware of what you're smelling because some of those that sensory input can be so subtle that you're not even consciously aware of it. But since we are talking about it, you can start to just walk around the world and notice what you're smelling and how it makes you feel, and what memories that it might trigger. And if you do, what I tell my patients is, if you can identify your triggers, then that's already the first step, because we have ways to smooth out those subconscious trauma patterns, and identifying the trigger is the first step. So if you know something specifically bothers you or brings up stuff, then you can actually do things to help like smooth out those neural networks.
It was interesting and kind of a positive sense. We do see patients who have injuries to their sense of smell, and it can be due to metabolic disease, say because of diabetes, or even hardening of the arteries associated with those areas. And like Arlene was saying, with COVID, we had a renewed interest in olfaction because it was happening to so many patients, but you see it after car accidents as well. But I had a lady come in who was unable to return to her home of Brazil because her dad had fallen, and so the family wasn't able to make the trip. And I said, "Oh, tell me about that." And I was thinking she was going to be talking about cloves and cinnamon and baking in the kitchen. And she said, "No, we would always go to the beach. And so the smells of Christmas for me are the smell of the ocean and picnics and summertime food." And just watching her dreaming about that and her eyes rolling and glowing with the thoughts of the smells was really very interesting to actually see someone reliving their their smell history with um, the wonder and beauty of a holiday.
And it's something like just talking about loved ones. This is so common when people are grieving, a loved one has passed. Like, one of the things that you miss about them the most that you never really thought about is how they smelled. And so it's so common to like take their clothes and like hold them and just smell them. And that's not something that we typically do, when they're alive. And so it's when things are missing that we sometimes tend to notice them more. But if you do find that, I'll give you a really simple exercise. So if you do find that there's any smell that triggers some emotion for you, some grief or sadness, or whatever it brings up for you, then what you could do, I'm gonna have you hold the mic real quick, I don't have the wireless ones today, is just give yourself this nice butterfly hug. And then you can just do this nice, gentle tapping here. So what that does is helps to connect the right and left sides of the brain. So if we're talking about any stuck trauma patterns or stress patterns, then that means that the brain is not processing them well, that the body's not processing them, it's not integrating those patterns. So it's like this stuck short circuit. And I deal with this every single day, not just with smell, but all kinds of stuck patterns. So this is like one very simple exercise, and just to breathe through and then notice like what you're smelling, and if it's triggering something for you, it helps your body process it. So this is a cross lateral exercise, and yoga and qigong and so many other things will incorporate those kinds of exercises. And so now that brings us to olfaction, taste, and your relationship to food. So food can be so emotional, and a big part of our sense of taste is actually due to smell. And I think that people really recognize that with COVID-19, and seeing how they didn't enjoy eating as much, and they didn't enjoy nourishing themselves as much because the food tasted so bland, and their taste from their tongues was still intact, that sensation, but it's the smell that really contributed to the majority of our experience of taste. And I actually love to talk to people about food cravings or addiction and what that means. And sometimes we shy away from talking about things that just are uncomfortable for us, or we feel like we don't have control over. But if you just consider what your food cravings are, say it's like a bag of chips or Cheetos or something, and for some reason you just don't have the willpower. And so it's like interesting to look at that. Like, why don't you have the willpower? It's not just willpower, because there's all these subconscious stress patterns, subconscious emotional patterns that have been grooved in. So if there's something that you really crave, then what I would encourage you to look at is what what does it mean to you? Like when you smell it, what comes up? Is there a memory from childhood that it's like sometimes it's like a feel good memory? That's often the case. And so people are trying to nourish themselves by reaching for food cravings, but things that may not be actually nutritionally nourishing. But they're trying to fill this emotional gap by tasting, smelling things that reminded them of a warm, fuzzy time in childhood. And so, I mean, everybody can think of things from childhood that whether or not we eat them now. I know I went to a Thai restaurant with my daughter this weekend, and they brought out, she'd never had them before, but they brought out a basket of shrimp chips. And so this is not something that most people in the United States eat, but it's very common in Asian culture. And it totally reminds me of childhood. And I don't usually eat like fried foods, but when I saw it, I was like, shrimp chips. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I love shrimp chips. And so, I ate a few and then shared it with her, and just shared with her, like, this is something that I used to eat when I was little, like all the time. And it just reminded me of my grandparents and my family, or if we had a celebration, then a bag would be out. And it's funny because there's nothing really nutritionally nourishing in those shrimp chips, but it just filled me with a different kind of emotion and joy. And fortunately, I don't have them all the time, but it was just this special moment. But then if you do have a craving that you feel like you're reaching towards regularly, to explore that and see what it means to you, and maybe see, are there other ways that you could fill in that emotional gap, that you're missing something and missing a feeling of warmth, of joy, of companionship, of family, whatever it is, to explore that and see how you can take steps towards that in your life without reaching for something that is not nutritionally dense.
And I think we were talking about that this morning just with popcorn. I mean, how many times have you had popcorn? The smell is wonderful. And eating it is fun. Some of it goes in your mouth and some of it falls on the floor and some of it goes to the family dog. And it's fun. And when you get into a certain situation, it might be almost like you're setting up a force field of happiness around you when you eat something like that, or even just smell it. It's irresistible. So I understand what you mean. It's very strongly associated with emotion.
But smell is so personal. So even popcorn, I mean, I know, like, if I smell the bags of microwave popcorn, it does not leave a good, like, emotional experience for me. So you're talking about like the freshly made, maybe stovetop popped, like real, right, real popcorn. So a smell is so personal, and which is why, like, for certain experientials, when we have classes here, then I don't tend to like bring out scents, because it can be so personal and it can bring up different things for different people. So one smell someone could love, and another smell that somebody just like really wants to push away. And as I was talking about, there's so many reasons for that. So, well,
that reminds me of patchouli. That's one of those things that patients either love, and then the next person will say, "Get that away from me."
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
And so that brings us to something that we don't think about as much as well: intuitive smell. So, Jim, I'm going to have you talk about this, because this was one of the first conversations I had about just olfaction and smell with you, and I know you have so much that you would like to like.
I can only say that it happened to me, that I would smell something and I could almost see into the smell as to like a whole scenario around it. And I can't describe it any more than that. But that was really my first hit with intuition, was through smell. And Arlene and I joked about it because it is kind of funny, but it's not that common, perhaps.
Well,
Maybe
how
it,
do you use it? Like what do you mean by intuitive smell? Like how does it come to you? What are some examples of
oh,
what it
very
means to
simply,
you?
you can walk into a room and you can smell the stress in a simple way. You can smell the who's been there. You can smell sort of what they're going through. It has
So you have some of
dimensionality
those
to it.
canine genes in you.
Perhaps.
Yeah, so I mean, just walking in a room and being able to like sense things. I had this little checklist from my book that's going to be coming out in this springtime. That's called "I Am Intuitive: A Multidimensional Guide to Embrace Your Inner Light." So I'm going to read out a checklist if intuitive smell is something that you already have a knack for, or you can start to get ideas of how you could use your sense of smell for intuition. So um, to see if you have this naturally, then consider the following things. One, when you enter a room, can you tell if something quote smells off? Or can you sometimes smell things that are not in your immediate surroundings? Um, or can you smell the presence of a loved one who has crossed over? Or can you smell whether someone is telling the truth? And lastly, do smells bring back strong memories for you? So chances are you have one of those at least, but if you checked off like multiple ones of those, then yeah, intuitive smell is something that you could have a knack for. And whether or not you do, then you could actually still develop it. I know that, oh gosh, I just think of like when loved ones have passed and then family members would be thinking about them, like when my dad had passed and one of my siblings would be thinking about him. And then all of a sudden, they would smell something delicious that he made, like chicken adobo or something that we used to have pretty regularly. And they weren't cooking. They didn't have those ingredients out. So it's so interesting because like that to me is like something that is a message from spirit, like that whisper, or what do you call it when you smell a little olfactory message sent to you from
Mm.
beyond, um, and that was really comforting for them. So that's another way to use your sense of smell intuitively, and that's what we're describing before. It's like, do you smell something that's not like immediately like present in that room? So smelling something that my dad had made before, but you're not actually cooking, you don't have those things out, there's no other reason for you to smell them. So there's so many ways that we could look at this, and we're going to be teaching this for physicians this weekend. Any last comments you want to make?
No, just I'm really looking forward to the course because we're going to get into the embryology of smell. We're going to get into the anatomy of smell. And then we're going to look at the whole circuitry and how it actually connects to our emotional state. Because there are certain ancient organs that are associated with our senses um, and our emotional memories. So, very powerful stuff. Look
Yeah.
forward to it.
So we're really looking forward to exploring more of this with a great group of osteopaths and physicians this weekend, exploring sense of smell with the emotional body and other ways to sense and release emotional shock in the body. We'll also be going through generational trauma, the mitochondria, and how that relates to maternal lineage. So, a lot of interesting topics. And if there's anything here that's been interesting to you or you're curious about, then feel free to leave us a message, a comment, and we'll get back to you. You can always connect with me elsewhere on Instagram at All Worlds Health, on Facebook, All Worlds Health and Pediatrics. And you can sign up for my love letters. I send them out once a week on Wednesdays. You can do that on my website, allworldshealth.com. So have a great rest of your week. I'll be back next Wednesday for another topic. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. And I believe in you, so I hope that you believe in you too. Take care.